In one passage, a really good example of this, by the way, is jumping back over into John, where Jesus says, the truth will set you free. What does he actually mean by that? Because if you just go into John and from John, you don't really 100% understand that. Now, within the context, you should be able to pick it up, but it's still a little, it's not super clear until you get into the New Testament. Because here he says in John 8:32, he says, and you shall know the truth, and the truth will set you free. Now, I think our translations do a beautiful job of translating this. Most of the translations do. And one of the things that really would be an emphasis on this is they actually include the article for truth. Now, there's significance to articles, the word the, in the original. It is talking about a specific truth, not truth in general, but something that's very specific. Now, if he wanted to say truth in general, we just drop the article. So Jesus could have expressed just truth in general would set you free. Oftentimes, this is the way this passage is actually used. And of course, he does actually state in verse 34 that those who commit sin are a slave to the sin. Now, again, this isn't super clear until you start getting into Romans chapter 6, where you find out the sin is a reference to the sin nature. And actually, through Christ and what we have, we're free from the sin nature because we have been immersed into Christ, into his death and resurrection. Of course, that's over in Romans chapter 6, where we're verse 4 is probably fine. Therefore, we have been buried with him through baptism into death, that just as Christ was raised out from the dead by the glory of the Father, even so we too should walk in newness of life. But really, in verse 6 is what I'm wanting to focus on. It says, knowing this, that our old man was crucified with him, that the body of the sin should be rendered ineffective. That's what your word done away with is literally. It's rendering something idle. It's no longer able to produce what it was intended to produce. It does not say it's gone. It's done away with is not a real good translation of that particular word. And we have that in other passages of scripture where it expresses it a little bit better. But it specifically uses the sin. And we have that connection. So scripture interprets scripture. And that's important. Similarities are similarities.